Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So we move on to the next chapter of our curriculum, which is called the passive fi'l, which is called fi'lu mabniu lil majhul, is a passive fi'l. So an active fi'l, the doer is known. So an example would be Yusuf hit the man. So Yusuf is the doer, so we know who the doer is. But in passive fi'ls or verbs, it keeps the doer hidden. In both past and present tenses, you can have a passive fi'l, and they do not contain a maf'ul bihi. So if you remember, maf'ul bihi is a detail of the action, and it answers the question what and who. So examples of a past passive would be the man was hit. So we know the man was hit, but we don't know who hit the man. And a present passive would be the man is being hit. But again, the person who's hitting the man, we don't know who that is, so it's hidden. Passive, one of the reasons, there are many reasons why a passive fi'l is used. An example would be emphasizing the action and showing respect to the doer who is left unmentioned, and other reasons as well. There's two parts of a passive fi'l. So the passive fi'l, which is the action, and what we call the na'ibul fa'il, and that's the thing or the person the action is done to, and it's called the na'ibul fa'il. So the example here would be the man was hit, which is a past tense. So it's a passive fi'il, meaning the passive fi'il part of the sentence is was hit, and the na'ibul fa'il is the man, because the man is the one who the action is done to, and that's a na'ibul fa'il. So no maf'ul bihi in passive fi'l, so there's no what or who detail. And the maf'ul bihi in an active fi'l is converted into the na'ibul fa'il in the passive fi'l. So something to note. So if we start with past passive fi'l, so making a past active fi'l into a past passive fi'l. So the last harakat on the fi'l is unchanged. The second to last harakat becomes a kasra, and all the harakat before the second to last letter except the sukoon is changed to a dhamma. So this is how you convert from a past active fi'l to a past passive fi'l. So meaning the last harakat is always unchanged, it's untouched. The second to last harakat becomes a kasra, and all the other harakat before the second to the last letter is changed to a dhamma unless it's a sukoon, and it remains as a sukoon. So examples, iqtaraba is a past active form, which means he came close. Uqturiba is the past passive form or version, which means he was brought close. So we don't know who the doer is. He was brought close. And if you look, the last harakat is unchanged from the active to the passive. The second to last harakat gets a kasra, which is the ra. So before it had a fatha, then it gets a kasra. And all the harakat before the second to the last letter, except sukoon, is changed to a dhamma. So meaning, in our example, the ta, first it has a fatha, then in the passive form it becomes a dhamma. The kaf has a sukoon, and that's unchanged. The kaf still has a sukoon in the passive form. And the alif has a kasra in the active version, but in the passive it gets a dhamma. So another example is fa'ala, which is a past active form. It means he did. And the fu'ila is the past passive form, meaning it was done. But we don't know who the doer is, that's why it's passive. So if we see again, the rules are followed. The last harakat is unchanged. So the fatha on the lam is still a fatha in both cases, it's unchanged. The second to last letter, that harakat gets a kasra. So the ain that had a fatha before in the active form takes a kasra in the passive form, and all the harakat before the second to last letter, unless it's a sukoon, is changed to a dhamma. So in this case, the only letter that's before the second to last is the first letter, which is the fa, and that's in the active form it has a fatha, then in the passive form it takes a dhamma. So an example of a past active and passive fi'l table for fa'ala, meaning he did. So we're talking about past tense. Now we'll make a note that in some cases the meaning may not make sense for this specific example, but the process for making a past passive fi'l still applies in each case. So the template is still the same. So if we start from the huwa, we've written down in red the active version, and then underneath that is the passive version. So the active is fa'ala, and the passive would be fu'ila. So the last letter is unchanged, second to last letter takes a kasra, and all the other letters before the second to last one takes a dhamma, unless there's a sukoon, and if there's a sukoon, it remains as a sukoon. So the huma is fa'ala, and then the passive would be fu'ila. And the hum version is fa'alu, and then the passive version would be fu'ilu. And then the hiya version is fa'alat, so she did, and the passive would be fu'ilat. So again, the last letter is unchanged. But bear in mind, when we say the last letter is unchanged, we mean of the original root letters, so the fa'ala. So the lam is unchanged in this case, and the second to last letter is actually the ain, because the ta at the end is an add-on, is something that's been added on. And so the ain, which is the second to last letter, takes a kasra, and then anything before that takes a dhamma, unless it's a sukoon, and it remains as a sukoon. So it's fu'ilat, and then the huma version is fa'alata, and then that becomes fu'ilata, and the hunna version is fa'alna, and then the passive version will be fu'ilna, and then the anta version is fa'alta, so you did, when you're talking to a man, and the passive version will be fu'ilta, and the antuma again is fa'altuma, and the passive version will be fu'iltuma, and the antum, which means all of you, will be fa'altum, and the passive version would be fu'iltum, which means it was done to you all. And then anti, which means you feminine, so fa'alti is the normal active version, and the passive would be fu'ilti. And then the antuma would be fa'altuma, is the normal active version, and the passive would be fu'iltuma. And then antunna, for the active version, is fa'altunna, and the passive version would be fu'iltunna. And then ana would be fa'altu, the active version, and ana is meaning I, and the passive would be fu'iltu. And nahnu is fa'alna, the active version, and the passive becomes fu'ilna. And now we move on to the present passive fi'l, and the steps to making a present active fi'l into a present passive fi'l. So the first letter gets a dhamma. The harakat on the last letter is unchanged, just like when we're dealing with past active fi'ls. So the harakat on the last letter is unchanged, and all the harakat in between the first and the last is changed to fatha, except a sukoon, which is left unchanged. So the first letter gets a dhamma, the harakat on the last letter is unchanged, and everything in between the first and the last is changed to a fatha, except the sukoon, which remains a sukoon. So an example would be yaktaribu, which is the present active form, which means he is coming close. And yuktarabu is the present passive form, which means he is being brought close. So if we look, it follows the rules that the first letter gets a dhamma. In the active form, it's a fatha, but in the passive form, the first letter gets a dhamma. The harakat on the last letter is unchanged, so it's a dhamma in the active form, and it remains a dhamma in the passive form. And all the harakat in between the first and the last letter is changed to a fatha, except the sukoon, which remains a sukoon. So the qaf in the active has a sukoon, it's still got a sukoon in the passive. The ta which comes after the qaf, in the active it has a fatha, in the passive it takes a fatha because all of them become fatha. And if you look at the ra in the active form, it has a kasra, but then in the passive form it takes a fatha because everything between the first letter and the last letter takes a fatha except the sukoon which remains a sukoon. So here we have yaf'alu, so that's the present active form, which means he is doing. And the present passive form would be yuf'alu, it is being done. Because remember, the passive hides the doer, so it is being done, but we don't know who's doing it. So the first letter gets a dhamma, so the active was ya, was a fatha, then the ya takes a dhamma. The harakat on the last letter is unchanged, so the lam has a dhamma in the active form, and so does it in the passive form as well. And all the harakat in between the first and the last is changed to fatha, except the sukoon which is left unchanged. So here we have an example of a present active and present passive fi'l table using yaf'alu, which means he is doing. And as we noted previously, that in some cases, for this example, some of them might not make sense, but the template still applies. So we start with huwa, then the active version will be yaf'alu, then the passive version would be yuf'alu. So meaning the first letter takes a dhamma, the last letter is unchanged, and everything in between the first and the last takes a fatha, unless it's a sukoon which remains unchanged. Then the huma version is yaf'alani, and then that becomes the passive yuf'alani. The hum version will be yaf'aluna, that's the active version, and in the passive version will be yuf'aluna. So you notice that the ya in the active, which has a fatha, in the passive it just takes a dhamma, the first letter, the last letter is untouched, and everything in between takes a fatha. And bearing in mind, in this case the last letter actually is the lam. That's why it's not yaf'aluna, it's not yuf'aluna, it's yuf'aluna. So meaning the lam is actually the last letter, the wa and the noon are just add-ons, they've been added on. So here the active version will be tafalu, and the passive version is tuf'alu. And then huma taf'alani is the active version, and in the passive it becomes tuf'alani. And in the hunna version, the active is yaf'alna, and the passive version becomes yuf'alna. So the first letter takes a dhamma, the last letter is unchanged, everything in between takes a fatha, unless there's a sukoon which remains as a sukoon. So anta would be taf'alu, which is the same thing as here, if you remember. Taf'alu, which is you are doing, and the passive would be tuf'alu. And the antuma version is taf'alani, and the passive would be tuf'alani. And the antum active version would be taf'aluna, and the passive would be tuf'aluna. And with anti, which means a you feminine, so taf'alina is the active version, and the passive would be tuf'alina. And again, if you notice the first harakat, the first letter, the ta, originally has a fatha, then it takes a dhamma. The last letter in this case is actually the lam, because the ya and the noon are add-ons, they've been added on to the end, or ending combination. So the last stays as it is, which is a kasra, and then everything in between takes a fatha, unless there's a sukoon which remains as a sukoon. So the antuma version is taf'alani, and the passive version will be tuf'alani. And then antunna, the active version is taf'alna, and the passive would be tuf'alna. And the ana version, which is I am doing, would be af'alu, the active, and the passive would be uf'alu. And the nahnu, the active would be naf'alu, and the passive version will be nuf'alu. So remember that this process of turning a past active or present active fi'l into passive, that this template can be applied to any 3 root letter words. If you exchange the fa, the ain and the lam for the 3 other root letters, then the template still applies. So moving to the na'ibul fa'il, which we mentioned before, this is the thing or the person the action is done to. So the example was the man was hit. So the na'ibul fa'il is the man because the action of hitting was done to the man. So the normal fa'il is the doer, and the na'ibul fa'il both have the same grammatical rules. So there's 2 types of na'ibul fa'il. So one is the inside na'ibul fa'il. So if the thing or the person the action done to is a pronoun, or it's considered the outside na'ibul fa'il if the thing or the person the action done to is not a pronoun. So meaning it's like, for example, an ism. So the outside na'ibul fa'il and the outside normal fa'il, which we call the outside doer, has the same rules apply. So it must come after the fi'il. The fi'il must be in the huwa or the hiya forms, and the gender of the na'ibul fa'il must match the form. So if you use the huwa version, then the na'ibul fa'il must be masculine. If you use the hiya version, then the na'ibul fa'il must be feminine, and it must be in rafa status. So some examples would be khuliqna, which means we were created. So this is a past passive fi'il. So the noon inside the na'ibul fa'il is the attached pronoun. So the noon is inside is the na'ibul fa'il, which is the attached pronoun. And the other example is khuliqa mu'minun. So this means a believer was created. So this is a past passive fi'il. So mu'minun is the outside na'ibul fa'il because it comes after the fi'il, and the past passive fi'il is in huwa form, and because it's masculine, it matches the na'ibul fa'il, which is also masculine. So the gender of the na'ibul fa'il matches the huwa past passive form, so both are masculine. And the outside na'ibul fa'il is in rafa status, so it follows the rules. So therefore that mu'minun is the outside na'ibul fa'il. So now when searching for a passive fi'il, check the tense first, whether it's past or present. The past tense sounds to look for or to listen for would be the u and e. So you hear the u and then the e. And the present tense, the sounds to look and listen for is the u and the r sound. So as per usual, we always recommend at the end of every chapter to take a look at the vocabulary of this chapter at the end of this book, and ideally at the end of every session this curriculum is studied, so that your Arabic grammar knowledge increases with your vocab knowledge, inshallah.